You like to watch new stuff, right? Well, go to Hulu and see what's new, because Hulu has new stuff all the time. Like Vanderpump Villa, the new docudrama starring Lisa Vanderpump, where first-class luxury meets world-class drama. A new season of The Kardashians starring The Kardashians, of course. And Grand Cayman, Secrets in Paradise, the sizzling new reality show set in the tropical Caribbean. It's all new and it's streaming now on Hulu.
I actually had a conversation recently, and it was discussed, well, if I don't believe the book of Genesis, how do I believe that Jesus rose from the dead? And my answer to that is, well, I don't have an opinion on that anymore. So, but I can tell you, I can tell you that the earth is not 6,000 years old. I think we're past that point, just like it's not flat.
Yeah.
But people believe what they want to believe. So
You're listening to the Liminal Living Podcast, a resource of practices and perspectives for those in dark nights and deconstruction.
All right. Well, I am face to face with my friend Jeremie. You are lead singer of our band,
the Tom Ropel Band.
The Tom Ropel Band, which we're still searching for Tom Ropel.
Right. That was Tom, if you're out there, you're in the band.
You are in the band. That was a mix-up with with some of the marketing that the city put out. They thought my name was Tom Ropel. So, but we liked the name so much that we kept it. And
yeah, I don't think it's like a nickname. You don't get to pick your own nickname.
That's true.
I don't think you get to pick your band name.
And we were named by the city of Laingsburg, named our band.
So it's official.
It is. It's totally official. But apart from being the lead singer of an amazing band that just does rockin' shows, what else do you do? What are you interested in?
Gosh, all kinds of stuff. Music primarily. I'm the father of two late teen, early 20s children, husband of going on 27 years, live in Laingsburg, love anything and everything outdoors. I'm currently a community soccer coach, which is pretty fun,
Nice.
braving the weather, in the midst of our girls' high school season right now. So that I spend a lot of my time doing that. But this weekend, my son and I will be headed to northern Michigan for the official holiday of the opening of trout fishing season.
Oh, so, nice.
That'll be fun with the weather as it is right now, with leaky waders and frozen fingers, and you wonder why we do these things. But I think the partaking of those activities, particularly in Michigan when the weather is less than ideal, it's good for us.
Yeah. I
struggle.
It was like sitting in cold water does something good to the nervous system somewhere. So.
Yeah, I think that's pretty well documented. So I'm trying to convince myself of that so that I'm less ornery when it's cold out, because I find every year I get older, the more I complain about the weather. So that kind of sums up my time right now. Always got the different projects going on at home. And my kids have been gone for 3 months. My son was in northern Italy since January. My daughter was in Madrid for the same duration. So it was kind of interesting to have 3 months of kind of, just my wife and I. And you realize that, my son's 21. It's been 20 plus years of like kids, and now they're home. I love having them home, but it's kind of funny. Like the house is an absolute disaster.
What is it about kids that do that? It's like chaos embodied in.
Yeah. So that was kind of an interesting experiment in what empty nesting would be like. I didn't like it at first. As I explained to my daughter, I've never spent time in prison, but all I could think of was like being in solitary confinement and then going back to the general population.
I have been changed. Now we've talked a little bit about kind of your faith experience and journey, and it's a pretty cool one, but where did it start? And give us kind of like the faith paradigm that you grew up in, that kind of was the world that you lived inside of.
Sure. I grew up, a small Midwestern town, attending the church that my family, for at least 2 generations prior to myself, attended, a small church. And when I was young, my dad's a musician. He was a choir teacher in the school district that I attended. And I think when I was it was either 8 years old or 10 years old, he actually quit his job, recorded a record album as a gospel singer, like a contemporary Christian singer, back when there weren't really a lot of contemporary Christian music acts.
Was this like Kieth Green?
Kieth Green.
Era?
Kieth Green was my dad's. Kieth Green was my dad's Bob Dylan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
he kind of was the Christian Bob Dylan.
He was I think he was friends with Bob Dylan. But I know Bob Dylan played harmonica on one of his albums.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
he's such an interesting character. Like Keith, if you like dive into his history, there's so much. Like he's a really radical thinker, but then he was also caught up in some interesting Left Behind theory.
Oh yeah,
stuff. But
good
person.
Like a child, I didn't know then. I just knew that was the music that we listened to at home, and he was a big inspiration to my father. And then getting older, like going back and reading about him, I didn't realize that he was a child piano musical prodigy. Was on the road to being like a child musical star, and then he kind of threw it all away. And then I'm assuming that's when he became born again or found his faith. And then he was a pretty radical individual, and had quite, he became quite successful in that field. So anyway, when I was a pretty young kid, my dad, he was a singer, songwriter. He had written several songs, and he kind of dabbled with, playing his music in front of people. He would do like the classic sing at weddings and that kind of stuff. And he decided that he felt, in his words, he felt like he was being called into a music ministry. And so he quit his job and did that full time throughout pretty much my entire childhood. My mom had a job, and she kept her job, her place of employment. She worked full time, I guess is what I'm saying. And, looking back at it, I vividly remember having the conversation. I have an older sister, when my mom and dad sat down with the both of us and essentially told us, I'm going to quit my job because God is calling me to do this. And this is going to sound, when you're a kid, you don't really think about the ramifications. We're not involved in the weekly budget discussions.
Yeah.
And I just remember, like, I was bummed because our weekly thing was we would go get pizza every Friday night and then go get groceries. And because my dad was quitting his job, we couldn't go get pizza every Friday night. That's when I remember, like, I was like, man, this sucks.
And now you're building a pizza oven. It's like full circle.
Exactly.
Like,
There's something subconscious going on there. Yeah, I can have pizza anytime I want. Yeah, he did that, and it was a real struggle because I've talked to him about it since then. It was truly a leap of faith, to quit that steady income. Not that teachers make a ton of money, but he was making enough money to help support his family and to kind of go out on a limb and do that. I don't know as if you asked him if he would ever regret it. I don't regret it. I really respect that. I still do. Not something that I would probably do, but I've always respected that. And, I do, looking back, I do recall like there was some added stress within my childhood of, I think, probably not knowing how the house payment was going to be made, or not knowing where money was going to come from to buy groceries, and, my folks were smart enough to not let my sister and I in on those conversations. But the stress was palpable. I mean, I can I can attest to that. And I was in my group of friends, once I became a teenager and was a little bit more conscious of what was going on, I was definitely the poor kid. Mm-hmm. And I was the poor kid essentially by my parents' choice. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, but again, no regrets, because I think that kind of helped shaped me who I am today. And I appreciate that. Even if I don't necessarily agree with the reasons behind what he did, I still think that, as a songwriter myself, as a shade tree musician, yeah. I appreciate the fact that somebody takes the time to write something, whether it's a song or poetry or literature or painting or anything. I mean, art is art. Whatever motivates you to do that. And if that art helps somebody through a bad day or a bad moment in their life, I think that's really important. And I respect that about what he did. And he found a way to express his art form. I do know, I think that there was some level of frustration for him, because I think that there was, and I don't know if he would admit to this, maybe now that he's older, maybe we could ask him.
Bring him on.
But I think that he was involved in a larger kind of community choir that was divided between Florida and Michigan, Ohio. And my parents were pretty heavily involved in that. And, he was told at that time, oh, you're going to be the next big thing. You're going to be the next Kieth Green, or you're going to be the next. And it just never, he recorded a record album the old-fashioned way, where he had to pay for studio time, and he brought musicians in. I actually, as a kid in our kids' church choir, actually sang on a couple of those songs. So I can say I'm actually on vinyl.
No way.
Now my dad has all those records like sitting in a crawl space at his house.
My respect for you has just gone higher. You are on vinyl. Like that is
on vinyl. Yeah. Let's do it again. So that's my goal, is to do it again. But
Tom Ropel on vinyl.
Tom Ropel on vinyl. Yeah, vinyl's has made a comeback. I think there was an element of, he thought that, I think and I don't think he ever subscribed to the whole. I don't think the prosperity gospel idea existed necessarily. It probably did. I probably didn't know about it back in the 80s, late 80s. But I feel like there was an element of, well, God, I'm doing what you want me to do. Now you need to reward me. And I think there was a level of frustration and failure that he felt like on his part. And I remember he was a very good, he was really into, well, before I was born, he was really into the local community theater productions. And when I was probably my kid's age, was he always loved the musical Fiddler on the Roof. And his dream role was to play Tevye. It's just such a great musical. And he did it. He got the role, and he played that in the community theater. And it was so weird because it was like I was we can get into it. I've had the classic father-son relationship very strained with him, but it was the first time in my life where I was like super proud, because it was really cool to see him embrace, playing that role, even if it was like a dinky, local community theater. And he essentially won the Oscar that year.
No way.
Or they had like the award ceremony. And I mean, he killed it, man. It was it was awesome. And I was so proud of him. And I remember at that time thinking what I'm thinking now about like how he felt like he was disappointed. And I probably couldn't have expressed it correctly at that time, but I remember writing him a letter and learning that he dealt with a lot of insecurity. And I think artists, you kind of put yourself out there for the world. Mm-hmm. And if you don't get the response that you feel you want, you feel like you're a fraud or you're not good enough or this, that, and the other thing. And I remember writing him a letter. My mom actually gave it to me a couple of years ago, and I reread it. It was really interesting because I don't think I'd write this quite the same way today. But it was just like, hey, you're really good at this. Like, and it was essentially saying, I know you feel like you did us a disservice because you abandoned your financial security to follow your faith. And at that time I was still fully in on that faith. So the context of what I was explaining was different. Yeah. But I have the same sentiment today that I would back then, as far as like supporting his approach to his art form. And the point was like, success is not defined by becoming a star in music. Success is defined by did your performance or your song improve somebody's outcome for that day? And if it did, that's success. And that's it. You don't need anything more than that. And as I've kind of gone down the venture of playing music and then listening to my favorite songwriters, and listening to them say the same thing that I'm saying right now, kind of confirms to me that it's not like the show American Idol. You get into music so you can become the next star.
Yeah.
You get into art because you love making that art, you love performing, you love writing, and that's what it's all about, period. And if that's not your focus, if you become famous doing that, then good for you. But really, if you can pay your bills and have a roof over your head and food to eat, what more do you want? My childhood was traveling from church to church with a music evangelist as like part of his road crew. That was every weekend was going to almost every weekend was going to different churches, and he would do like a sermon and song type thing. So So yeah, through my teenage years, I do, and at that time, I certainly was a product of the faith that I was brought up in. But I do remember when I was high school age, finally, like on my own, sitting down and diving into reading the Bible. Because it was like you'd go to summer camp and it was all about you had to memorize Bible verses, and it always seemed kind of stupid to me. But I remember like really truly trying to comprehend and read at least the Gospels, and I think I read them a couple times. And I remember that pivotal point in my life of having like an epiphany of that I still hold today, of like, wow, this is like super radical, this socially radical individual. And then I would look at like the grown-ups, the adults in the church that we attended, and like listen to what they had to say or listen to what the sermons would say. And I'd be like, is there a part of this that I'm missing? Because what I read and what you're saying politically especially, doesn't really, they don't seem to line up. And for the longest time, I felt like something was wrong with me, like I'm not interpreting this correctly. And that was kind of like that was the first step in me kind of going into a different direction. So it started pretty early.
How would you define like the difference between what you're reading in the Gospels and then like what was being embodied in that community or being spoken collectively? Like,
well, at the time I didn't really know what it was, but now looking back at it, it was more like this is the concept of getting rid of all your worldly possessions, to follow in your faith, and to, the first will be last, the last will be first, taking care of the poor. It was really socially radical. I mean, to a point where back in the 80s, like, if you said the word socialism, in that community, you were,
you're going to be reported to the CIA.
Yeah, you're going to make it on you're going to be on some FBI list or CIA list, right? Yeah. Blacklist. So, I do remember talking to my dad, and this is when we really started to, like, we would argue these, and it was always like, you're a kid, you don't understand. I'm like, okay, maybe I don't understand. But now what I understand now, looking back at it, is essentially a lot of, I think what I was experiencing then and what we're experiencing now is Christianity in certain circles has morphed into this Christian nationalism, and it's pretty sad because I feel like the original context of the whole message is completely gone.
I think we've built, we used something called systematic theology, which is where you pull a single Bible verse out and then you put it in a box of, well, this is what the Bible says about, and then the box is labeled, salvation or afterlife or end times, or, you take all the different ologies when you're getting, a theology major or minor.
Yeah.
And we use systematic theology and we pull the verses out of their narrative context and cultural and historical context, and then we put them in these boxes. And I'm wondering, if we just created like this paradigm that was divorced from the actual narratives. Because when I dive in and I like read the narratives of the gospel, I'm always like, why didn't I see this when I was, like knee deep in this stuff? And now it's just so apparent. And I'm not against like systematic theology. I think we can still have it, but we need larger portions, like the whole story of this scripture can be put in this box. This is what Jesus says about taking care of the poor. Like, why didn't I have a box for that? When so many of the passages of the scriptures are, even the Old Testament prophets are about that, but I was never taught that was even a box. But there's so many, so it's almost like we got hyper-focused on a way of doing theology that then excluded like the message and narrative itself. And then we constructed a way of being that was just contrary to like the point of it all. Mm-hmm. And like hearing your story, I'm like I think that we did that, and I'm hearing that. Like you're reading the story and being like, okay, but I don't know how to make sense of this story in my community because they don't see this or practice this or even believe this. But here it is in the very document that we're all supposed to be gathered around.
Yeah, I it's funny you say that because I remember an experience where we, I don't know if my father's role at the church, he was an elder, in the non-denominational church that we grew up in, and I remember one Christmas, and it must have been based on a discussion that I had with him about that topic, like why are we not doing more outreach in the community? And I remember we had like a giving tree or something, and he must have volunteered himself to go deliver those gifts, and he took me with him. And it was kind of like, well, see, I'm not knocking, I appreciate the fact that he did that. And I think he realized that meant the world to me. It was the coolest thing, and I'll never forget it. But I think my takeaway was like, this is cool, but isn't this supposed to be every day?
Isn't the point?
Isn't the point?
Not like, not the dessert afterwards or an appetizer before?
Yeah. And I get that. I understand as an adult that's really hard to do. I stuck with being a member of the church and doing this stuff with my parents, traveling, doing the singing thing, and then when I graduated, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I had a definite interest in the outdoors, in science. That was always kind of one of my favorite subjects. Again, not knowing, I loved fishing and hunting and being outdoors, and I thought, at that time, I'm going to work for the DNR in Michigan, and that's what I thought I had to do. And so that's kind of the path into like getting an education in science. And you can probably tell where this is going.
I'm excited that we're going there.
So I should back up. Like, I didn't realize then, and maybe I didn't even realize 10 years ago when we were back at the church. But what I realize now, that the church that I belonged to was, for all intents and purposes, pretty fundamentalist. I mean, by the Bible, no other doctrine, completely independent, self-governed, fully democratic, quote unquote democratic, I should say. Mm-hmm. And pretty fundamentalist and pretty set on literally interpreting the Bible. The Bible is God's word. Everything that was written there is 100% objective truth, no exceptions.
So then you get to the book of Genesis and you're like, look, this is exactly how it happened.
Exactly.
Like, we have a reporter here who's,
Right.
doing the act of journalism and taking note of exactly how it happened.
Yeah. So you can imagine. So about that time, I remember there was like a big push for like the whole creation science movement, and you had speakers, the Answers in Genesis group started up. So Ken Ham, and there was a paleontologist that, an actual, I don't want to say something that's not true, but I forget the guy's name, but he had his PhD in paleontology. He was a pretty great speaker. I actually went and listened to him talk. And I'm guessing I was probably like 18, 19. And he came, and he was with the Answers in Genesis group. And he came to a church in our community and had a big following. And I remember going to listen to him talk. And as you can imagine, going into a natural science degree and studying that, they were kind of at odds with the literal interpretation of the book of Genesis.
Yeah. So
that, again, looking back on it now, I hadn't really thought about it. That caused a lot of struggle for me because I couldn't reconcile it. Because, you'd learn about, microbiology and understanding of the human genome at that time when I was going to school. That was in the early 90s, and understanding learning about genetics and learning about evolutionary biology. And I mean, it was just fascinating. I realized that there's this movement that's at odds with like the standards that we accept in science. And they were maybe convincing to people who weren't studying evolutionary biology, but it was, essentially now it's snake oil, that's like kind of the way I look at it.
I look at it as like a pseudoscience based on conspiracy theory almost. Like you have to almost to believe that, and I came up through that as well. Mm-hmm. But to believe it, you have to say that, like 95 to 98% of the scientists on the globe are all involved in some scheme to make people not believe in God anymore. And it's like, there's like a conspiracy at some great level, but now we have this one PhD guy that can explain it all, and we finally have the truth.
I actually had a conversation recently, and it was discussed, if I don't believe the book of Genesis, how do I believe that Jesus rose from the dead? And my answer to that is, well, I don't have an opinion on that anymore. So, but I can tell you, I can tell you that the earth is not 6,000 years old. I think we're past that point, just like it's not flat.
Yeah.
But people believe what they want to believe. So at that time in my life, I was still, I would still consider myself a person of faith. I still believed in, the tenets of Christianity. I certainly still struggled with, I understood and believed in the message of, loving one another. I was at a bit of odds with this notion that to be a Christian, I had to interpret the Bible, every word, literally.
Except the poor, except taking care of the poor. That's not literal.
Right.
We don't do that one.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. So that and at that time, I was within my family. My wife's uncle still is involved with a campus ministry program in the state. I lived at one of the houses there for a short period of time. like a co-op type house. I was involved in the campus ministry. I think I would play music. I would lead, like we would have the weekly discussions and we would do singing, and I would, I could play. I was learning to play guitar, or I'd learned to play, taught myself how to play guitar, and, I could sing. So I was it, I would help lead singing. And I made really good friends there, and we had some fun time together. My girlfriend was a part of that at the same time. But I just never, I was the only person in that group that was like a student of science. You know what I mean? So the way I coped with that is we just never talked about it.
Yeah.
We never talked about the discrepancies or the issues that I had. And, one thing that, it's interesting. I was thinking about, as a lead up to this conversation, I think about these pivotal moments in my life. And one thing that happened at that time was there was a guy who was one of the campus ministers, well respected. I believe he was the campus minister at U of M. I was a student at MSU. And when he would talk about how he graduated with a natural resources degree, and he would talk about, I don't know if he worked as a consultant, but he knew, he was really into plant identification and all that kind of stuff. And those are the classes I was taking at the time. And I must have confided in my girlfriend at the time about my struggles with reconciling this thought, and that group was a fundamental group essentially because they were the same as the church I grew up in that it was a literal interpretation. I don't know where they're at now with that, but I remember, without my knowledge, my girlfriend writing a letter to this campus minister expressing the struggle that I was having with my faith and my understanding of what I was learning, as a student of science in general, evolutionary biology. And this is going to sound terrible. He just ignored it. And I remember being mad. He never talked to me about it. He never responded. And I thought, looking back at it now, that was so irresponsible. You were a leader that us college students was looking to. And maybe no one ever asked you that question. What I realize now is he was probably doing the same thing I was. He was just, if I don't have to talk about it, I don't have to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to pretend like no one asked me this question.
Just move on with my life.
I don't know what has happened to that gentleman since then, but I remember that stuck out to me, and I felt like that's kind of weird. Like
we don't talk about this. This is off grounds.
I suppose that's a segue into kind of, yeah, I've had that experience a little bit too much.
Yeah.
In my journey, I suppose in my deconstruction of what about, well, we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Isn't your faith supposed to equip you to make you think about and be able to talk about those hard subjects?
I would hope so.
But apparently not. We just, without really talking about it or making a definitive decision, we just stopped attending church altogether. And I think at that time, there was probably a level of disillusionment where I didn't want to be, at that time, I probably thought well, all churches like this. Mm-hmm. They're all kind of a little bit crazy.
You're close.
So
close.
So we stopped. And
how long ago was that?
That was, gosh, I got married in 96. It was about that time. So 96. So probably for we would do the typical, we were the classic, when you'd have church directories and you'd see people's pictures and you'd only see them on Easter and Christmas.
The Creaster. The Creaster. I call those the Creasters. Yeah. Christmas and Easter.
That was my wife and I. So that was the time period where we were first married, and we both were working full time. We did not attend church. And about that time, I think my in-laws had kind of stopped going to church as well. And they were traveling on the weekends, and it was not like really a conscious decision of, and I imagine at that time that there was some guilt on my part, a healthy dose of guilt of not attending church, because that was another part of it. Like, we'd have discussions about, people think if they just show up at church once a week that they're good. I don't know how true that is, but at that time, that's kind of what I felt. And we stopped attending. Truth be told, I probably felt somewhat guilty about it, because I'm sure my parents probably disapproved, And then we had kids. My son was born in 2002, and it changed again. And then it was like, we're adults now. We have kids. We started going back to the church that I grew up in. And it was like a pivotal moment, because I remember like becoming friends with my parents' friends. And it was so weird. Like, this must be what it's like to be an adult. They don't look at me like a kid anymore. That's so weird. And, built some really great relationships. Again, not necessarily through like studying the Bible, or it was just like you build acquaintances and you become friends with people that are in the same building.
Yeah.
And I think my wife and I kind of missed the social interactions with church. And of course, young couple with kids, like, what else do you do?
Yeah.
As they got older, you do play group, and then of course they get into school, and then you get into the school community activities and all that kind of stuff, which is probably, why I still coach soccer today. At that time when my son was born, the church hired a new pastor. I became really good friends with him. He was another guitar player, and we would play music together. And that kind of set the path towards somewhat where I'm at today. And we, through that process of getting involved with the church again, I actually got involved as a deacon, got elected into as a deacon of the church, because there was a core group of individuals that would kind of, I suppose, like in any organization, there's 10% that do 95% of the work. Yeah. And
what is a deacon in that? Like, what do you do as a deacon? Because, like, if you look at deacon, elder, trustee, like, those names are used across the spheres, but they're different in each place.
We were like, it was all about operations, like keeping the building heated and, plowing, figuring out how to plow the snow, how to save money plowing snow. It was all purely, like maintenance, additional maintenance staff.
The holy building and grounds team.
The holy building and grounds team, which, I'll get to. I'm actually quite proud of that fact. That's kind of one of my crowning accomplishments. Anyway, I became a deacon. My kids were, preschool, elementary age. I'm not quite sure when it happened, but I can't remember if I think we had like 3-year terms. And I remember I did a term as a deacon, and then I got nominated to be elected as an elder. And in that time, I also was asked to be on the board of the campus ministry that my wife's uncle ran in Michigan. And, at that time, again, looking back at that time of my life, I had become really good friends with a core group of people at the church. I was good friends with some of the, family members, extended family, who were also on the board of the campus ministry. I enjoyed going to church. The pastor was my friend. I recall, there would be certain things that would be said maybe ambiguously in sermons that I would disagree with, but I didn't care. At that point, I didn't care because my family we were a member of this larger community, and I could kind of just cast aside whatever differences of opinion I had. And there was really no, I look back at it now, it was more of like, I'm a member of this club, and these are the benefits of being a member of this club. And it's good for my kids to be around other kids that are not, because we went to a church in a different community. So it was kids that were not friends with my kids. And my wife and I both agreed that was probably good for them, like the social interactions. And then of course my parents were there. So they would get to see, Grandma and Grandpa every Sunday. And my parents loved that because my nieces and nephews live on the west side of the state, so my folks wouldn't see them like they would see my kids. So I got nominated. I can't remember if you get nominated. I think you get nominated. I don't know.
It's different everywhere you go.
But yeah, you get nominated to become an elder. And I thought, oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. And we have the election, and I got elected as an elder, and I'm pretty sure it was a 3-year term. And right about that time that I became a board member of the Christian campus ministry. And that's when it all, what do they say? How's the saying go? Like, you don't want to know how sausage is made.
Oh, yeah. You've seen how the sausage is made?
Yeah. That was when it all, became abundantly clear to me. Within that church, and I don't know if it's changed. I doubt that it's changed with the leadership that's there. We would do, part of our responsibility as elder was bigger than just, the maintenance of the building. We would go serve communion to shut-ins, which I actually really enjoyed. I thought that was the coolest thing. Mm-hmm. It was kind of one of those things where you're like, oh man, I am on duty for that this Sunday. I just want to go home and watch football and take a nap. But it was so rewarding to go visit these people because they were so grateful for the visit.
Yeah.
So you would have that responsibility, and then you would have the responsibility of having to deliver the communion meditation, because we would do communion every Sunday. And that one I did not particularly enjoy. I think I've told you this before. By that time, I should say by that time, I was also very active in singing in front of people, playing music, playing my own songs, both in the church and in public. And for me to speak in front of somebody, I would rather stand up and sing a song in front of them than speak. So that was like a big hurdle for me to get over. I didn't really enjoy the communion meditation because I was realizing that I was having a hard time coming up with something that really, I wasn't trying to BS anybody, and that's kind of part of the overarching issue. So anyway, two big pivotal things that happened. I recall, we'd go into these elders meetings once a month, and oh my gosh, they would go on for like 4 hours.
Holy cow.
You'd get home at midnight, and we wouldn't really talk about anything. Half the time was we would pray. You do like the classic like group prayer. And I realized pretty quickly, this is going to sound crass, but I kind of, it had been building up to this point. I was kind of took issue with prayer in that setting, and being part of like, at that time we had a men's group where we would get together on Wednesday nights, and the kids would have church and my wife would have a women's group. And we kind of got a little disgruntled with that. The men's group was cool because it was like group therapy, essentially. Mm-hmm. But then I always hated when we prayed, because it was like, you're praying for the benefit of hearing yourself talk.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like an art form of like, I'm going to one up this guy next to me because I can speak better than him, or I can formulate a response. And it always, I don't know, maybe I read into it wrong, but I always felt like that. And it kind of put me off a bit. I didn't like that, because I always thought, well, if God knows what I'm thinking, why are we doing this? Why am I, it's 11 o'clock at night. I want to go home and go to bed. Like, why are we spending an hour and a half, anyway.
Yeah.
You know where I'm going with that. So, that kind of was curious to me. But the big thing in those meetings was, I remember, getting back to us delivering communion meditation, all the deacons, all the elders were men. And I remember somebody within the congregation brought up the question, why are there no women that give the communion meditation? And I was like, that's a good question. Let's talk about that. We don't talk about that.
We don't talk about Bruno.
We don't talk about that. And it was like, so there was that. At the same time, I remember vividly my son, like, he must have had like a natural science class, maybe in 6th grade or 7th grade. And a friend of mine was his Sunday school teacher, his children's church minister. And like, I remember driving home from church and my son saying, so-and-so said today that what I'm learning in my natural science class is complete nonsense. And I'm like, whoa, slow down.
Here
what?
You are with a degree in natural sciences.
So it all kind of, I really, when push comes to shove, that was the pivotal moment in my life where we had to stop attending that church. I realized, and in the context of being an elder in the church, and again, I realized that I'm saying my faith at that time was tied to my involvement in membership of this church. Mm-hmm. So I realize now that that's not, the two can be mutually, they don't have to go together necessarily. But it really kind of rattled me to my core, because I realized, not in a sense that I didn't want to be part of it anymore, because I didn't want the responsibility. I actually enjoyed I was friends with these people, but I realized as an elder, I would sit there and look around the room, and this was the same with the board that I was on, mm-hmm. with the campus ministry. I love these guys. They're really nice guys. They're my friends. I love the elders. I don't think the same way that they do. And if I don't think the way that they do, I cannot represent the leadership of this organization. I can't be a part of it. Like, I'm out. I'm not a part of this club anymore. That coupled with, it really hit home for me with my kids, that my kids were asking the same questions that I asked my parents at that age. And my parents didn't know how to answer them. The difference was I went through that, and I realized I told my wife, I said, we can't be a part of this anymore, because I cannot, the struggles that I went through high school, and then into college, I don't want my kids to deal with that. I don't want my kids to have to reconcile those differences. And at that time, I stuck with it because we were at that time the one thing that I enjoyed and one of the things that I did with my father was we had started a men's singing group at the church, and I was still an elder. I didn't quit. I would attend church, and my family just wouldn't go. And I would go because I was in the men's singing group. And then if we sang, my family would come. And it was, fun for me because that was like the one thing my dad and I could do where we wouldn't argue.
Yeah.
Music was the one thing that and I think we, like, both looking back at it, I think he would agree that was a really good time together. We had a good few years there. We were able to do that. And, I have a good relationship with don't get me wrong, with my parents now. We've kind of hashed it out in just a few years ago, talking about why finally it came to a head, why we don't attend the church anymore. So that's kind of gotten us to where we're at now, where this is going to kind of sound silly, and I'm not. I don't mean it in any. I'm not trying to make light of anything, but I feel like now I have a better appreciation for the idea of faith than I've ever had before, and how important it is for people. I don't necessarily. I guess I would say I don't necessarily subscribe to any one. I think it's a way of trying to understand reality and make sense of the world around us, that I think has been very important to the development of the human species. I don't regret any of the experiences that I've had. And I hope, my hope is for my kids that they're better off for the experiences that I've had, the bad experiences that I've had, for them to understand that, not everybody thinks this way. And that's to be honest with you, that's been kind of a struggle, because I have to remind my daughter specifically, all Christians don't believe that the earth is 6,000 years old. All Christians are not homophobic. You are stereotyping an entire group of a major portion of the human population. They don't all talk and vote and politically discuss things the way you think they do because of your experience with that church that we used to attend. And even with that said, those people, I still love those people. They're still human beings. I mean, we may disagree on certain things, and they may justify their belief based upon a flawed interpretation of what their faith apparently tells them. They're still good people. They would, you don't like this guy. Well, if you needed anything, you could call him and he would do anything for you. I've had that discussion with my kids, this guy believes this and he's crazy and he thinks these people should be blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, if your car broke down, could you call him? Would he come help you and help you out? Oh, yeah. I'm like, okay.
That's a good reminder.
I think I've noticed that politically right now, like we're, this divide is real. Like it's us versus them, and it's so dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
I think of a lot of that mindset, though, I blame on places like the church I attended, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you say? There used to be a song that I used to sing that everybody really liked. It's not one I wrote, and it was like something about I'm not of this world. And I'm like, yeah, I don't sing that song anymore. Because that's crazy talk.
I sent you the podcast about from John Vervaeke, The Crisis of Meaning.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah,
the concept that rocked me most from him was that concept of like the agent arena relationship.
Oh yeah.
That we get inside of an arena, and then that arena gives us meaning because there's other people operating on the arena's rules. And I think the best explanation or description is kind of like a football field. Like you go inside the football field, there are, different players on the field. There's the refs on the field. There's the coaches. There's the, even the emergency doctor crew. There's like all these different people on the field, and they have specific jobs to play. And there's a meaning to everything. And they have like even specific uniforms and like vocabulary that they use inside the arena. But if you started acting like a football player, like in the middle of a grocery store, people are going to look at you weird. Like, what is this person doing? Like that, it doesn't fit this arena of, going to buy your groceries. And I think like what we did with the faith was we made an arena, a pretty big one, and everyone got roles. Here's an elder, here's a deacon, here's a, women can't lead in that role, right. You can bake cookies for us. And, everybody got a specific role when they came in. And then there was a common narrative, the Bible is literal. Science is a big conspiracy to try and prove our arena false. And there's a whole like narrative that we all believe in, and then we all build community around it. We all have jobs and identities that are built around it. But then in like more modern times, probably beginning like in the 1920s, when science was bringing science to the things of religion with like archaeological finds and like the structure of scripture itself, like going in and doing textual criticisms where you're like, Genesis wasn't written by Moses. There's 5 writers here, and it was compiled by somebody. And there's, so you start looking at stuff like that, and all of a sudden, the people who are inside of the arena are looking at the people on the outside saying, there's a threat. They're bringing a threat to what we have built. And what we did was we called our arena ultimate reality. And the whole goal was to get everyone inside the arena, almost like Noah's Ark. Like get everyone in the ark because God's coming back, and man, he's pissed. And so everybody's got to get in the arena or we're all going to die. And now there's this existential threat called science and culture and the world out there that threatens our arena. And now as we progress, we're like 100 years from that fundamentalist reaction to it, where they came up with fundamentalism, was in 1920s. And they had like, the core tenets. One of the very first tenet of that fundamentalist take was that the Bible is literal and must be taken literally, all of it. And then I'll put an asterisk there, except Jesus. He was just speaking figuratively. Paul was speaking so that was the number one thing that they did, and it was a reaction to the sciences and the criticisms of archaeology and textual criticisms that they were bringing to the things that were never questioned. And those things now, as we're generations away from that moment, the younger generations they're just not vested in that arena like like, even our generation was starting to get a little bit disconnected from it, but our parents' generation was all about it, and it was a social institution of the West. And it seems like that arena is just not holding up. And it's because of our definition of what that arena is. This is ultimate reality. Everything else is a conspiracy. And I think that is played into the polarity that we see today in politics. It puts in that anti-science it seems like that reaction is now coming to like a head, and the younger generations are just like, it's not even important to them to be in that arena. And I wonder if there's a different way to be in an arena of faith that doesn't have to be so combative against people who aren't in there. I think there is. I mean, there always has been. I just wonder if we can find it and rekindle it. I'm not sure.
The thing that I miss from being a part of that church community are the friends that I made, and the friends that I made there. They're still my friends. We still communicate with one another. We don't see each other as much as we certainly used to, but yeah, I hope so. I hope we can get to that point. But I don't know. I don't mean to be pessimistic, but it's not looking so great right now.
Well, where we are in that in-between spot where the old arena is kind of crumbling, and the new thing isn't made yet. What sustains you through that in-between place?
I think on the outside looking in, it was very difficult for me 10 years ago or so. I don't even know when I kind of like stepped away, to be vocally, like the thoughts to express, like to be able to say what I'm saying today. 10 years ago, I don't think I would have been able to do it. I would have had the thoughts in my head. I don't think I would have been able to say them out loud. There's a certain sense of freedom, and satisfaction in a weird way of being able to be open and honest about my thoughts and being critical of what I was raised to believe. What sustains me is art, in a sense, music, songwriting, literature. There's something that's transcendent there, something bigger and beyond any individual human being. And there's a song line that I have probably quoted too many times. There must be more good than bad, or we'd already be gone. That's from one of my favorite songwriters, Ben Harper. And I agree with that, because I think we're struggling to find our way forward, and I love the context. I've not made it through the entire Meaning Crisis podcast, but that's been really interesting and inspirational to hear somebody academically talk about the issues that we have with trying to make sense of meaning outside the realm of that arena of religion to define you, who you are. I mean, it's kind of funny to me that people would accuse somebody who is agnostic or an atheist of being like, it's all sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I'm like, it couldn't be further from the truth. It's the absolute opposite. I feel like when you don't, being part of a fundamentalist group where I hate the passive hate the sin, hate the sin, love the sinner nonsense, specifically when it's talked about with homosexual people. It's funny that we can, I guess getting back to the comment you made, Jesus taught in parable, right? Mm-hmm. But we can't understand metaphor in the Old Testament. It doesn't I've never thought about it that way. It's kind of goofy.
Yeah.
The persecution of humans who are homosexual, that was another, to be honest with you, that was another part of the issues that my wife and I had, was because about that same time that we left the church, my brother-in-law came out. And, my kids' reaction to that was really profound to me, because we were always very, we didn't agree with what the preacher was saying in the pulpit, talking about how this is a sin and these people are going to go to hell. That's not what we talk to our kids about, And I remember when we told our kids, that their uncle was gay, the reaction was, I just thought of a context of if I was put myself in their shoes and it's my parents in the 80s, their reaction was oh, okay, that's cool. And I appreciated that, because that was okay, you don't get many wins. It doesn't feel like you get a lot of wins as a parent, and that was one of those moments that stands out, okay, yeah, we must have done something right, and they love their uncle. And that was a hard one for my wife, because at that time, it would come up every so often, not so much in the sermons, persecuting people who lived that way, had that tendency, or I don't know what the word I'm trying to find for.
Yeah. Their humanity.
Yeah. And then, you couple that with the basic understanding. I mean, it's pretty common knowledge that something like 10% of all sexually reproducing species exhibit homosexual behavior. So notch one for science, it's observable. Why would you think that would be different for humans? And that's another kind of bigger issue, where this human exceptionalism, to a certain extent, I always kind of rejected that. We're part of this world. We're a biological being with all these flaws, and and that kind of takes you down the road of people who kind of abandon their faith because of sickness and death and torture and all the terrible things that human beings have to deal with. And you kind of when you're on the outside looking in, it doesn't make any sense, what kind of weird artificial general intelligence simulation are we living in? Yeah. Getting back to that. So yeah.
Well, thanks for telling your story, and thanks for being you and being true to your own integrity, which I think is really important.
Yeah, thanks, man.
That's important. It's not necessarily just about can you fit in and conform, that doesn't really have much power to it. And you being true to your own intellect and your own integrity, I think there's something really powerful about that. And that's why we can hang out together and play music together.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's important to me too. So,
well, it's kind of my approach is I don't know what I'm going to think 10 years from now. And I'm kind of, but I'm going to keep reading and listening and writing and living, and hopefully if I'm still around 10 years from now, I'll be even more enlightened, you know, and like life is that pursuit of wisdom to me. That's what makes, I guess that's what gives me purpose, you know, and motivation to move forward. So, yeah.
I like to close with a quote from Richard Rohr, one of my homeboys. I wish I could personal homeboy, but he's a homeboy from afar. He said, all scripture is true, and sometimes it happened.
That's fantastic.
Thank you for listening to the Liminal Living Podcast. If you're interested in spiritual direction to help you navigate through your dark night or deconstruction journey, please check out our website, www.liminalliving.org. We will see you next week. Blessings.
On this episode of Plant Killers, we'll explore one nation's most notorious fruit and vegetable killer, bad dirt. What makes bad dirt so bad? The answer? The ingredients. But fear not, true crime enthusiasts. This story has a happy ending. New Miracle Grow organic raised bed and garden soil. It's made with quality organic ingredients from upcycled green waste like compost and aged bark. Unlike the other guys who can't say the same. Looks like bad dirt's murdering days are over, thanks to Miracle Grow. Join us next time on Plant Killers.